Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gwendolyn Reese, and I am a High Priestess of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, a Wiccan tradition, and my coven Theophania is located in Washington, D.C. This workshop is on spiritual evolution and the initiatory path. So I hope that it is of use and interest to you. Let me get the screen up and we'll get started. So, one of the very first things that I want to start with here as a general comment is the occult phrase, all things work from the inside out, because I think we need to recall that throughout this entire presentation. And part of what this means is, in saying all things work from the inside out, it is that the entire cosmos on all levels is conscious, and that those states that we consider our inner states of consciousness are causal to everything external in the world of form. So this is just a statement about the nature of reality that I think we should hold in our minds throughout this presentation. Now, the other thing I should say for those who don't know me is that I am not a fully enlightened being, so I offer these workshops as something that hopefully will help you explore or think in some newer or deeper ways. But as always, you bear the responsibility for using your own critical thinking and judgment, and I always encourage you to do that. I am also a librarian. I am all about critical thinking. So, like I said, I hope that this is useful for you. So one of the first things is like, why am I talking about this topic right now? And depending on how long this video happens to last, I should just give some quick context around this. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I was asked to create a presentation for the Assembly of the Sacred Wheels retreat, and I decided that this was the topic that I was going to take up. And my reason for doing this is that in times of trouble, and we are in times of trouble, I believe it is very important to revisit your core missions, be that as an individual, as organizations, as groups of people that are united around common ideals. So it is my belief that both individually and as witches, as Wiccans, as magical workers of different flavors, as, spiritual people, there are reasons that we are here, and there are reasons that we are now. And I think that it is important for us to revisit those high-level vision ideas. And part of this is so that we can make appropriate prioritization of resources. And this is not just often when we think about resources, we think about fiscal resources, but ultimately, as mortal beings, our main scarce and valued resource, our limited scarce and valued resource, is time. So figuring out how to prioritize our time and our energy, I think, are absolutely critical. Finally, I also want to mention here that when I'm talking about let us revisit our fundamental missions and our priorities and our sense of purpose, part of the reason to be sure to do that in times of challenge, of crisis, of difficulty, is that purpose and meaning, having a sense of purpose and meaning, are central to resilience. And that's resilience on an individual level. It is resilience on an organizational level. It is resilience as a species. And one of the things for which I am eternally grateful that I was exposed to very young was the work of Viktor Frankl. And in particular, this is Man's Search for Meaning. I read it when I was probably maybe 18 years old. And this has been very formative for me. So I bring this to you if you are not familiar with the work of Dr. Frankl. Dr. Viktor Frankl was a psychologist, and he was a Jewish psychologist who was imprisoned in the concentration camps, including he was eventually, finally, after many horrific years, liberated from Auschwitz. And he wrote about this particular form of psychology and invented forms of therapy that have to do with the search and quest for meaning. And he talks about this in terms of tragic optimism. And this is something that I try to cultivate as a mindset. In tragic optimism, you absolutely face the reality of the difficult, horrible things that you are going through and that is around you. You do not do any of the spiritual bypassing. You don't put on a false Pollyanna face. You recognize the true suffering, the true pain, the true tragedy of what it is that you are engulfed in or witnessing. But then you also seek to find the lessons and the meaning that you can, the purpose that you can either find in it, or if you cannot find it, as an act of will, you make it. And so that is part of how I approach everything, which is, what are the lessons that I can find? And if I can't find them, what is the meaning that I can make as an act of will? So I give this to you as a bit of background in our current crisis with this global pandemic and all of the social, there's a lot of social pain that is coming from this. And by that, I mean, we are seeing the lack of resilience in our current social structures. And it is also my hope as individuals and as a society that rather than just attempting to go back to what was before, if you have an economy that can take this kind of hit in a single month or in a single 2 months, you do not have a strong economy. So we need to be looking at the foundations and building them differently. So that's a bit of a soapbox, but I just wanted to bring this up in terms of why I'm looking at initiation right now. So it is my belief that one of the core missions of Wicca is that Wicca is a mystery religion. And by definition, all mystery religions are initiatory. Okay, so I want to unpack that a little bit. The mysteries have to do with a type of truth, higher truth, that is operating on the level of being that is immortal, that must be experienced and cannot be explained or spoken or shared in some other way. So the mysteries are partially mysterious because they are operating at a level of being that is outside of the kind of experience that we can convey using the tools of daily life. And they are accessed differently. And they typically do have various oaths and so forth that are to keep them secret, partially because there are mechanisms that you use in order to take someone to this type of experiential knowing that is beyond what can be spoken. And the only way to do that sometimes is to keep them quiet, as well as to honor them. So, but the initiation is this process through which you are experiencing this great cosmic knowing, transformative kind of experience at the level of the immortal part of your being. And the ultimate claim of the mysteries is always that through the initiatory process itself, you are irrevocably changed at the immortal part of your nature. So that, I believe, is one of the core missions of Wicca, is that Wicca is a mystery religion. Now, in another video, should you choose to watch it, which is actually part of Theophania, my coven's foundation, so it's in the Foundations Module 1 video, I talk there about one of the core missions of paganism, of which Wicca is a part. But what I consider the overall project of paganism is the creation of alternative cultures to the ones that we are currently in at this historical moment. It's the creation of various other ways of constructing a society and constructing a culture. But I would say that Wicca in particular, also brings the mystery aspect to this project as well. They're not the only ones that do, but that is part of Wicca. Now, in the mysteries, there are historical antecedents. In particular, this form of religion that are the mystery religions, the initiatory mystery religions, these are Hellenic, they're Greek. And the oldest is the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter and Persephone. And there are also the Orphic mysteries, the mysteries of Dionysus, the mysteries of the greater gods or the great gods of Samothrace. There are a number of other mystery religions. And of course, the word mysteries that we have here that comes from this, mystes, this has to do with being an initiate of these cults. So that's actually where our term mystery comes from. And as I mentioned, all of them are initiatory. They are all things, unlike other forms of initiation that you might hear about, such as initiation into adulthood. These are voluntary. These are not things that you have to do. They're not things that are natural in that way, like being initiated as an adult. So, or being initiated into death ultimately is also is a form of rite of passage. Mystery initiations are always voluntary. And as I mentioned, they claim to make a change at the immortal level of your being and therefore are causal beyond death. Additionally, they, in the ancient Hellenic mystery religions, have a form of intimacy that they create with certain of the great ones. And as I said, originally this is a Greek form. It is an Hellenic form. So you later have things like the mysteries of Isis, the mysteries of Mithras, neither of which are originally Greek deities. And of course, Isis, for example, is a very, very, very ancient Egyptian deity. But the specific form of the mysteries arises in Hellenistic times, in which Egyptian culture and Greek culture was melding after Alexander the Great. So I want to talk quickly about the initiation and spiritual evolution and their relationships. So there are many, many different traditions now that include what I would call an initiatory path. And basically an initiatory trajectory is a method of accelerating spiritual evolution. Now, accelerated growth is never natural. It just isn't. And so there are dangers of injury in the process of accelerating growth that we need to be aware of. And part of the reason, if you're going to undertake accelerated spiritual evolutionary growth, and you could do this as an individual, but the reason to be doing it through some sort of established kind of mystery initiatory type of lineage or trajectory is that traditionally that process then is under the care of the great ones and is utilizing tested structures that are associated with traditions, which lessens or mitigates the risk of the danger of injury in accelerating growth. It is my belief, my experiential belief myself that I have observed in not just myself, but in many other people who are on these kinds of paths. And I believe this is probably universal, is that once you are truly on an initiatory path, once you're truly in one of these kinds of traditions or trajectories, you're going to be brought back into one of them in each incarnation. So, for those of us who came to these traditions because you just can't not, there's a deep longing inside of you that drives you to do them. And even when you're like, I'm just going to focus on my mundane life for a while, it's like you can't stay away. And I think that is a sign that you have been on one of these before, and just no matter what you do, you're just drawn back over and over again. Now, I want to talk about spiritual evolution. So spiritual evolution is the natural process in which life unfolds and grows on all levels of being. So I am also a theosophist. Now, you know, as with everything, I never accept anything as like 100% doctrine kind of thing. I believe in the process of always allowing yourself the flexibility to grow and change, and that is something that is important. I always reserve for myself the right to change my mind. And as I always say, I strongly recommend that you all reserve that right for yourselves too, to keep an open mind. But in my study, one of the things that I have found very useful is The Secret Doctrine by Hellena Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky. In terms of, there's some summaries in there. First of all, I find it very, very provocative, but there's also sometimes just some quick ways in which really intense, deep metaphysics is presented in like some fairly short ways. So I'm going to read some of them to you and kind of unpack them a little bit, because I think these are some of the understandings, the metaphysical understandings that underlie what we're talking about with spiritual evolution. So in The Secret Doctrine, they talk about the 3 fundamental propositions. And the first one I'm calling here the Law of Unity. And I'm going to read from The Secret Doctrine, and then let's unpack it a bit. So the Law of Unity: an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and can only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of the Mandukya, unthinkable and unspeakable. To render these ideas clearer to the general reader, let him set out with the postulate that there is one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested, conditioned being. This infinite and eternal cause, dimly formulated in the unconscious and unknowable of current European philosophy, is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is, of course, devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. It is beingness rather than being, sat in Sanskrit, and is beyond all thought or speculation. Okay, so basically the postulate here, this is something that if you listen to the world's great mystics across traditions, they talk about a state of being that they have experienced, a unitive state of being that is outside of time and space. And time and space, of course, are the Kantian a priori categories that he says construct all of human consciousness. So whatever this is a state of being that is outside that, an experience that the mystics claim to have that is outside that. It is outside of all attributes. You cannot give any attribution to this experience, to this level of whatever this is. This thing that is neither being nor not being. And it also violates the fundamental law of subject-object differentiation. So there is what happens in this unitive experience is that the mystic loses their sense of differentiation and becomes one with that which is neither being nor non-being, has no attributes, is beyond time and space and so forth. So the idea here is that at this ultimate level of being, that is the root, the causeless cause of all else, that this lies kind of causally in back of, in every moment, because it is outside of time, all of manifested conditioned reality. And then these systems of thought all pretty much tend to rely on what is an emanatory scheme. And in this emanatory scheme, more or less what happens here is that, and I end up talking about this in a lot of videos, but it's because it's kind of It's one of the fundamental propositions. That's one of the metaphysical things that's behind almost everything else. So you have this unitive state, and then the great mystery is that for some reason, it suddenly has self-consciousness. Okay, so that's that initial split into subject-object, right? And I said that the unitive state has no differentiation between subject-object, which is why it is unspeakable, because all language presupposes subject-object, time and space attributes. So, okay, so for some reason, it has self-knowledge. Well, whatever that is having self-knowledge, if you think about your own meditation practice, right? You are watching your mind. There's something going on there where there's a one that is watching and is watching something else. Okay, well, the something else being watched is not the same as the one watching the mind. So you have here this thing, and sometimes it's translated as the mind of God, or in Greek it's sometimes called the nous. So it is observing this one, and the one loses nothing of itself, and so you have this initial thing. But in the process of thinking about or contemplating the original kind of source, it has thoughts. And that becomes the next level. And then that next level is looking up, if you want to use that kind of metaphor, and contemplating what is above it, and it has thoughts about it. And you start coming down into more and more differentiation. And we call this sometimes that it's getting, the vibration is getting kind of denser, slower, as opposed to the super high vibration, if you want to use that kind of metaphor. And it's coming down into differentiated manifested reality. Ultimately, all of these things are all aspects of the one, or the source. But like I said, this is this process of coming down. So I want to show you something really quickly here. In the Theosophical Society, they tend to use an awful lot of Sanskrit, and there's reasons for that. So, you don't need the Sanskrit for this. This maps on to many other systems, but the general idea here, when we're looking at this, is that we have the stepping down into density. So it becomes like this range of vibrations that are going from the super high vibrations down into the lowest that reach the physical. And there's lots of different ways that you can divide this up. And that's not necessarily important. What is important in this is the idea that there is a scale, and it goes from the super high vibrations all the way down to the dense vibrations. And that all of these vibrations, when we get to it, like human beings exist on every single one of these all the time, but these are also like all of the world is existing on various levels of these vibrations. And then the other part that I want to point out is that there's the scale, and then there's those subscales, if you see over on the right. And the idea here is that as you're coming down, there's lots and lots and lots of different notes. And if you want to think of it as a metaphor, this is important for the idea of sympathetic resonance, which is, if you've ever gone to a piano and you hit the middle C note really hard, all the other C notes vibrate. Okay, so on this various stepping down, casting on the mantles of density into differentiation, there are also these notes on kind of this repeating pattern, and therefore they have a resonance on all these different levels of reality. Okay, so that's the principle of unity and how it becomes down into diversity. So the second one is the law of periodicity. Also, sometimes we could call it rhythm or cycles. So, the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane, periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars and the sparks of eternity. The eternity of the pilgrim is like the wink of the eye of self-existence, as the Book of Dzyan puts it. The appearance and disappearance of worlds is like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux. The second assertion of the secret doctrine is the absolute universality of the law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow, which physical science has observed and recorded in all departments of nature. An alteration such as that of day and night, life and death, sleeping and waking, is a fact so common, so perfectly universal and without exception, that it is easy to comprehend that in it we see one of the absolutely fundamental laws of the universe. So everything has these cycles. And of course, you know, Wicca, for example, has many, many of these different cycles that we work with, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the day, the cycles of astrology, the wheel of the year, and so forth, but that everything has this kind of cyclical ebb and flow. That gets combined with evolution, which is the third. The fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root, and the obligatory pilgrimage of every soul, a spark of the former, through the cycles of incarnation or necessity in accordance with the cyclic and karmic law during the whole term. In other words, no purely spiritual Buddhi, divine soul, can have an independent conscious existence before the spark which issued from the pure essence of the universal sixth principle, or the oversoul, has A, passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that Manvantara. Manvantara in that cyclic thing is like a period of manifestation, as opposed to pralaya, which is when everything dissolves. So it has passed through every elemental form in the phenomenal world of that Manvantara, and 2, has acquired individuality, first by natural impulse and then by self-induced efforts, checked by its intelligence from the lowest to the highest, manas, which means mind, excuse me, from the mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel or Dhyani Buddha. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts to man save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations. So the idea here is that everything in the world is conscious, everything in the world is growing, everything in the world is learning. Evolution is about learning, mastery, and growth. And that there is an entire process in which every single spark from that divine one has to go through these periods and cycles of growth and reincarnation, or sorry, growth and evolution through the process of continuous reincarnation. Okay, so everything is conscious, all life is growth. All right. Now they talk about the kingdoms, and I just want to quickly talk briefly about that. Because the idea is that on that casting on of the mantles of density, there's a process by which, you know, and this is constantly happening, there's these new kind of like life sparks that emanate out of the one, and they're in the process of coming down those scales. And the elemental kingdoms, and there's a number of them, are in the process of coming down, down into density. And their job is to learn how to hold forms. They give form, like they give it pattern. So elementals are like the plastic essence of reality. So like when we have a thought, there is something at that level of vibration that gives it a form, and how stable that is. And of course, in magic, we use an awful lot of thought forms. That really has to do with a number of things about the quality of the thought and how it's fed. But anyway, the big thing here is that the elementals, and we're not talking about the elemental kings or the like, which are kind of the larger, more evolved entities that are, you know, a group situation over this. But the individual elementals, they don't yet have self-knowledge. They don't have any self-knowledge. They may have tremendous power. If they're like way, way up there and very fine and kind of like new, they may be operating at a level in which they have tremendous power, but they don't have self-consciousness. They haven't been through this entire process yet. So as they're coming down, their job is to figure out how to hold form until finally they reach the mineral kingdom, the densest part of the physical world. And that is where they are really, really learning how to hold. And this would be, you know, all of the atoms, all of the, you know, the material stuff, all the things that make up any of this. This is all, you know, it's all mineral kingdom. And each atom has its own kind of intelligence. It may be different than our intelligence, but it has its own kind of intelligence. And then once that form has really, really got it and is holding and has learned how to hold, and when you start hitting the crystals, they've started to learn how to grow. And then we have, from there, we have the vegetable kingdom. And the vegetable kingdom is learning how to respond to the environment. You know, the plants move towards sun and their roots go towards water. And so, you know, they're learning how to respond and adapt to environment in a way that is a little different than the lessons of the mineral kingdom. And then in the animal kingdom, what you have there is they're really mastering, they've mastered all that. They've responded to their environment. They're mastering emotions. They're mastering the level of being that is emotions, and they're beginning to unfold mind. Now, one of the things to remember is there's a huge range of development in these. There's lots and lots and lots of different lessons that, you know, you can see. So like in the vegetable kingdom, this goes from everything from like a phytoplankton up to a sequoia, which, you know, have each one of those trees has, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years of experience. And the animals, that's everything from like an earthworm all the way up to a seeing eye dog that can do some pretty decent arithmetic. So there's a huge range of development and evolution in the various kingdoms. So then you get to the human kingdom, that's us. And we probably also have about as big a range, but I want to be absolutely clear. There is no way, there's absolutely nothing physically, socially, or any of that that can ever tell you about the level of development of a human. There's nothing that differentiates us by birth or nature, none of that. So there's no like clue there, and anyone who ever tells you otherwise is deeply ethically problematic. So just please keep that in mind. But in the human kingdom, you know, we are still working on, we're from everywhere. I'm working on really still completely integrating and mastering our, the place where emotion and cognition mix up to, you know, mind is really where our primary growth action is. And so it's fully mastering mind and then beginning to unfold spirit. And then once we have really accomplished that, we graduate from human and we become something else that is beyond, you know, where we are at this moment. And those would be, you know, depending on how you believe, that would be kind of where the gods are, where the gods, the heroes, or whatever, you know, their next form that they are continuing to develop. Now, I just want to quickly point out here, we have the scales. And so you have then, for example, the elementals, you know, as they are coming in, they may be manifest on some of these, but they're not manifest on all of them until you get all the way down until you're in the mineral. And the mineral through human exists on every single one of these levels of vibration. Once you graduate from being human, so some of the spirit beings, often what tends to happen is that you tend to not be down at the very densest vibrations anymore. You may be up like into the etheric, or maybe even into some of the more rarefied of the physical, depending on kind of like where you are, but that would not be this physical. But so anyway, but the idea here is that you know, there's the coming in, there's the mastering, and then once you've mastered it, what you're doing is you're trying to move your work is higher up, and then you're trying to use the vehicles below it, which you have now mastered their use. So I do want to also point out here that we are all cells in greater bodies. And this is just a real basic kind of thing that I want you to think about as an analogy, because it goes beyond just humans. I used humans in this particular drawing because, you know, it's useful. We tend to think about ourselves, and that's okay, because we should. That's where our work is, right? So anyway, though, if you want to think about this, again, like think about the analogy of the cells in your body. You can take the cells out of your body, put them in a petri dish. They have their own kind of little life, doing their own sort of thing, you know, but at the same time, they come from you and they are dependent on you. At the same time, your body loses none of its coherence with the loss of some cells. In fact, all of our cells change over every 7 years. So it has a type of coherence that is not dependent on the cells. It's not dependent on the little individuals that make it up. On the other hand, it does not exist at all if it's not the cells. I mean, you know, if you took all the cells away, you've got nothing. It doesn't exist anymore. So there's a very strange kind of relationship that is here between the individual cells and the greater. So as we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about the fact that, you know, the being that is this physical form only experiences through the medium of the cells, we are also cells in larger organisms. We are a part of our local bioregion. We are a part of our bigger, like more local ecology. We also are part of various soul groups. So all of this we have, there's a kind of group soul that is around this. Ultimately, all humans are a part of the group soul of humanity. We often talk about, like, you know, that there are group souls for, and there are, for things like, you know, some of the animal kingdom, those of us who do certain kinds of work, we can touch some of those group souls, but we have one that is humanity as well, and it is real. And ultimately, humanity as a whole is a part of the mind of the great being that is this planet. And of course, the planet in which we live and move and have our being, it is not just the physical body of the planet. It is our closest God. And we are, you know, as I said, a cell in it and a part of the mind of the planet. But the planet itself has an etheric body, it has an astral body, it has a mental body, it has a soul body, it has all of these different levels of reality that it is living and growing through the cells. So I believe that humans are a part of the mind of the planet, and therefore when we do certain kinds of work, and we're going to be talking about this with our own evolution and accelerating our own evolution through initiation, that is a part of the planetary logos, the god or goddess that is this planet doing that, trying to grow. Okay, the planet itself is a part of the great being that is our solar system. The solar system itself is a great being that is a part of an even greater being that is our galaxy. And it kind of goes on through there. So everything is living and growing, and none of us are separate. And when we are doing some of this work, we are a part of larger beings doing this sort of work. Okay, so what is a human being? This is my favorite definition of all times. It comes from my beloved theosophical elder, Julia Rogers, who I believe turned 98 a couple of months ago. So, love Julia. So a human being is any being in any time, in any place, wearing any body in which highest spirit and lowest matter are joined at the plane of mind. So on that vibrational list, we are at the very top, we're at the very bottom, we exist on all of that level of vibration, and our main work is at the level of mind. And in this drawing, mind in Sanskrit is manas. That's where our work is. Now, mind is incredibly important because it is where you have the split between individuated and group consciousness, like the larger access to the larger consciousness. And also it is where the split is between those things that dissipate at death and those things that are that immortal kernel of you that passes from incarnation to incarnation. And the way in which we talk about this is the difference between persona and individuality. So the individuality is that part that passes from incarnation to incarnation. Let me just go back here real quickly. Okay, if you look on that number 5, where it says manas, the blue, and then you look at where on that subscale on the other side, it goes from the blue up. Everything from the blue up in the manas, so that, and then all of the buddhi, all of the atma, that is your individuality. That is those are the levels of vibration that do not dissipate at the end of that do not dissipate with the dying process. So the persona then, persona actually, it's from Latin and it means mask, and it means mask like in the old tragedy and comedy mask, where it's like, you know, you have your being that is your true being, and then when you were in particular roles, you put on the mask. And then, you know, the mask, among other things, has like, it's designed in such a way in those old theaters that it allows you to project certain things through it, right? So in looking at it, it's like you're projecting certain things, and it helps you project that part of your spirit that you want to be more obvious and accessible and amplified in that moment. But it ultimately is a construct. So that's kind of the difference here. Everything that is down, so from that green on the 5 down, these are all vehicles. They're useful. They are very useful. You need them if you're going to be effective in the world. They allow you to amplify certain aspects of your spirit, of your potentiality for particular purposes, but they're not you. They're ultimately constructs. So the rainbow bridge then is really those upper aspects of mind. From, you know, around the blue and the indigo and the violet is what that's supposed to be. It's not necessarily coming across perfectly on the screen, but you know, that that aspect of mind, when we talk about the rainbow bridge, in the Sanskrit it's called Antakarana, and that is about building intentionally that bridge so that we are operating and able to cross over back and forth the levels of mind that are looking up and are more abstract and are part of the individuality, and then being able to readily access and master the bridge down as well, so that you are able to use the vehicles of the concrete mind, which is the mind that allows you to do things like find your way to the airport or buy groceries or all these really important things. I mean, you know, your super duper lovey abstract mind is useless for that. It needs a functional vehicle. So I'm in no way giving a value judgment that is against this. You need well-organized, mastered vehicles below. Otherwise, you're useless in the world. And that's our entire point here, is we have to be of use in the world. So, but the rainbow bridge, that antakarana, that is the ability to consciously move into the aspects of self. Sometimes we call it the higher self, and do that at will. All right, so this is another drawing, and just to point this out, because it also does have to do with the ability to operate in group consciousness. So this is just, you know, at that very highest level, you'll see the divine in there, and then it goes out, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, that's that mind. You know, these are just the Sanskrit words, but you can see here that it is in that blue where we begin to get differentiated. And then the others are really experienced more differentiated than that. So the emotions, the etheric body, and, you know, and the energy, the like health energy kind of thing, and then the physical body. So just to point that out, that as we move up into this higher vibrations, that's where we're heading into more unity. Now, in every single human incarnation, we recapitulate human growth patterns. And this is very much like when you are examining things like the way in which a fetus will go through all of the different kind of evolutionary patterns before it gets to human. Okay, so when we are born, for about those first 7 years, what we're really mostly doing is really, it's functioning on getting the body to work, and we're beginning to awaken, you know, the emotions. So, you know, that's kind of like the work of a little human. You know, for the first 7 years, they're trying to master the body, and then they're starting to awaken the emotions. And then when they're 7 to 14, they're really, really focused on unfolding desire and aversion, which is what the lower scale of the emotions are about. And that's, you know, that can lead to like passion. It can lead to things that can continue as lifelong passionate interest. So it's not that it's bad. Don't mean that in that way. It's like, you know, but trying to really figure out the desire aversion situation is largely what they're dealing with that age. 15 to 22, there is some focus now in more of the real, what we call real mental development. But the real action ultimately is in the social emotions. And this is often where we see the higher social emotions kind of played out. And I think, as somebody who teaches at the university, I kind of wish that we were able to structure our society a little differently, because it's at that age where they're, allowing them to unfold their idealism is so important. It's so important. And that's really where their attention should be. And it's not that they don't learn, because they do learn, but their primary growth is in those kind of higher idealistic social emotion things. And that's where it should be at that level. And then really a lot of times the 23 to 29, that's where you start like really developing the practical mind and mastering the ability, that vehicle of the ability to take care of your life, the adulting stuff, but also just, to really get good specialized skills. Now, the danger, of course, in our society is that everything is pretty much, all of our educational system is designed to be done at 21, when they're not really in a lot of ways developmentally at the place where that should be their attention. So then you see in a lot of the schools, including in the old Platonic Academy, they wouldn't take you to study philosophy and to really start unfolding on the level of the higher mind until you're 30. That's really kind of where it's more developmentally appropriate. But of course, for us at 30, we're totally enmeshed in our jobs and rarely ever have that stimulation. So I'm really grateful in many ways to all of the various spiritual scaffolding and schools and teachers and the publishing and all of that allows us, outside of a system that is set up to do this, to have the kind of stimulation that we need, because you need stimulation for growth. So, you can't grow without some stimulation. So I'm really grateful for everyone who is participating in creating that stimulation that frankly is not, our society isn't set up for it. So anyway, whole point here is that each human beings go through this kind of recapitulation in which what we're doing is we are attempting to master the vehicle that we're working on and get it to the point where it works really, really well. And then we begin unfolding the one that is above it. So it kind of keeps moving up. And then what happens is, as we do that, then the causation, so the higher vibrations are always causal to the lower. They have more of a causal oomph, let's say, to what is below it. Okay, so it's not that it's a linear causation, because, if you have problems in your body, that can most definitely affect your emotion, your minds. But it is like there's more causal power naturally at the higher vibration. So part of what you're doing is you're gaining mastery of the lower so that you can really use them as your tools and your vehicles. And then as you go up, you're trying to reverse the causation so that, the causal impulse and the intentionality runs down. Okay, so here we go. In each of these stages, the drive for expansion tends to come from below. And then through practice and experience, you reverse the polarity so that the causation tends to flow more from the higher down. So what are the challenges of human growth at this moment? I think that becoming more active and integrated at the level of consciousness that is at the level of being that does not dissipate at death. So anything that we do to really become more conscious and active and, working at the level of being that is the higher self. It's one of the reasons why I believe it's important to do things like study philosophy, even though sometimes it's really hard, is that it's getting us, it's like working those muscles on any of the kinds of things where we're really trying to do some of the deep spiritual work where it is beyond the parts that are, often it's frankly beyond the woo too, and then to integrate it. So one of the big things that I always talk about is that growth has two phases. There's the part that is the expansion, and then there's the really tough work of integrating. And, we have to be sure that we're doing the integration for this to really function. So the second one is to become consciously aware of and participatory in group mind and group soul. And this is, again, as I mentioned, at the higher level, separation begins to recede. This is one of the training benefits of working with a group, working with a magical group, is that you begin consciously participating in group mind, group soul. You actually are in group mind, group soul in many, many different ways, and you can always work to become aware and active in them. And so, for example, if you are working with other people, any organization has a group mind, group soul. It's not always a healthy one, but you can become active and aware, and you can have some influence that will be greater than if you were not intentionally doing that. So becoming aware in those levels, that all helps, because the more you do it, that starts to pull you up and to become more active in the level of being that is not mortal. All right. I also want to point out a little bit more about kind of the spiritual evolution at this moment. So, as I said, I believe that human beings are active at the plane of mind, and the implication of that is that switch, that working on building the rainbow bridge, building our ability to cross over quickly into the level of the higher self, into the individuality, into the part that is not the mortal self, but is the immortal self, the God self, that this is part of the work of being a human. And we are to become more consciously aware, but as individuals in group mind and soul, which is the mystery. So what happens then is, like, as we become more aware and more active in the group, part of the mysteries is that you don't lose your individuality, is that, you know, the seeming paradox is part of the mystery. And as I mentioned, if we are cells in the group soul of humanity, so that basically what that means is that the more of us that make it through, that manage to fully master mind and begin to open at the level of spirit, therefore making it through beyond being human, ultimately graduating from the human condition, the more of us that are able to do that, the more it will drag the group soul of humanity with us. And we need that. In my mind, with this kind of group soul of humanity, that we are part of the mind of the planet is really going through a rough time. And, you know, that we can look at that and be like, oh, we're the cause, we're so bad. And, you know, but the thing is, it's like, if we are part of the mind of the planet, this is like the planet is doing some really, really heavy shadow work and developmental stuff. And, you know, there's always a question, will this entire being that is the planet make it or not? And a large part of that has to do with, you know, are we doing our work? So it is my belief that, you know, this is perhaps some of the most important stuff that we are doing. So initiation. I want to talk quickly about some definitions. In English, initiate, to initiate something, means to begin something. But in Greek, the words that are used there is the one who has experienced the mysteries, the myste. Also, there are some of the Greek words, the Hellenistic words that go around the mysteries that are related to someone who has, it's the ending, the telete. So it's related to someone who has participated in their ultimate purpose, which is related to the conclusion. So I would say graduated. And a lot of the words in the ancient Hellenistic mystery religions have to do with this kind of like, you have just gone through and met your ultimate purpose. So the initiatory path, as I mentioned, is a method of accelerating growth. And I do believe that it is very important, as I mentioned, because I think it is important for us as individuals, but as part of the group soul of humanity, that we really need more people, kind of the momentum of trying to get us and get this planet into a safer place. And it may be that this is just always part of the development of a great being that is a planet. You know, I guess maybe at some point that would be us too, but, you know, at any rate, it's a very difficult and challenging moment. And so the more of us that do this work, it is perhaps the most important work that we can do in service of the world and all of the beings with whom we share this greater earth. Okay. So typically then in the initiatory path, there are compassionate elder beings be they are gods, be they beings that used to be human and are now not, like some of the ascended masters from the theosophical tradition, be they people like some of the high-ranking lamas, some of whom have chosen to come back, even though they are off the wheel of compulsory incarnation. But at any rate, these compassionate elder beings in the various initiatory paths, they give us, and for us in Wicca, mostly we're working with the gods, the heroes, the, you know, the enlightened ancestors or what have you. But, you know, they give us inspiration. My experience is that they are often looking out for us and for our well-being from the inner planes. And one of the keys, though, is that they are providing guidance, they are providing support, but they are calling you to be like them. They are calling us to become like them. We are being called into spiritual adulthood in no small measure. And so they are never, ever infantilizing. If you are dealing with a being who is a god or a goddess and is always like, oh, my child, let me take care of everything for you, and it has kind of a thing that is infantilizing about it, that may be against your evolution, which doesn't mean to say there are definitely times in which, you know, the compassionate beings, when you're having a really, really, really rough time, but are trying to stand on your own 2 feet, that they may not be there in a compassionate way, but it will typically be more like the kind of compassion that you would get from your, you know, 'cause there often is some intimacy there, from your partner or from your, you know, or from one of your best friends or something, rather than kind of having that infantilizing edge on it. So the other thing is that, you know, the initiatory path is really, it's about self-cultivation. It does take self-effort, and it is about creating a plan and moving forward in your own development and taking charge of it. So in the initiatory traditions then that we have, they are scaffolded. So as I said, you know, they, to do this work is not natural. It's not something that's just going to unfold on its own. So what you have to do is you're trying to accelerate your growth, and you want to be stretching, but you don't want to go to the point of injury. So in a scaffolded way, what that's doing is setting up some kind of some structures around it to make it a little safer. If you think about like building a building, you know, you put the scaffolding up so that it is safer for you to do that building project. The initiatory traditions tend to provide methods and techniques. For particular magical traditions, they may come with keys to a particular stream of power or magic, and they provide a community of support. Now, one of the things that I find very powerful is coming out of Buddhism. And various schools of Buddhism, such as Vajrayana Buddhism, which is Tibetan Buddhism, a number of them actually in Buddhism, I would say qualify as initiatory traditions. They're accelerated development, and, you know, they have all of the qualifications. So there's this idea of taking refuge in the 3 jewels that comes out of Buddhism that I find really useful for us to think about. And so, first of all, I like the idea of taking refuge, like this idea that that is what you are doing. There's something really beautiful about that to me, but it's the way in which they do it too. So you take refuge in the Buddha. When you're taking refuge in the Buddha, you are not taking refuge in like, oh, Buddha, help me. That's not what's going on at all. What you're doing is you're saying, okay, there was once a human being, and that human being, who was Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, managed to achieve full enlightenment. And if a human being has managed to achieve full enlightenment, then that means that I, as a human being, have the capability of achieving full enlightenment. So it is a method of taking refuge in the taking confidence from the idea that if a human being has done it, that means that it's possible for a human being to do it, and therefore it is possible for me to do it. Excuse me. Secondly, taking refuge in the Dharma. So the Dharma are the teachings, the skills, the techniques that are taught in that particular initiatory tradition. But the idea here is, if there have been methods that a human being has used, and that at this point many human beings have used, that can take them into enlightenment, then I take refuge in the fact that they could take me into enlightenment, that there is wisdom there that I am capable of using for this purpose. And then there's taking refuge in the Sangha. And the Sangha is the community of seekers. So that is to take refuge in the idea that I am not alone in this path, in this quest, that I am walking this path of accelerated development in the company of others, and I can rely on them for support, and I can be of support. So I am not alone. And so I think that is a really kind of beautiful thing that is worth keeping in mind. Now, for the pagan paths, really what we're doing here is that we are rebirthing them. I talked a lot about the fact that there was incredibly rich, ancient, initiatory traditions that did this work, and they were forcibly ruptured. We have to acknowledge that they were forcibly ruptured. The Christian Emperor Theodosius forcibly ended the mysteries. So I do not believe that there is an unbroken lineage out there from the past that has somehow miraculously made it through all these times. I think that there are historical antecedents, there are folk practices, but I don't believe that the real mysteries as traditions survive this. However, we are rebuilding relationships with the great ones, and we are rekindling those lines of power. And so my metaphor here is that it is my belief that just like there is a natural spring that is just there, it's a lot of these things are just, they're there, these streams of power, that it just takes us building a fountain house on top of it to make it accessible again, and then we can get to it. The other thing is, my experience is that the great ones are absolutely almost desperate for us to take this back up and to stop this kind of infantilizing nonsense and work and rebuild these relationships with them. So in my experience, they have been reaching out, waiting for us to reach back and take their hand and like move again. So, the fact that pretty much all of the initiatory traditions, by the way, they have in their history, in their mythic history, that they were taught by the great ones originally, and then it was the humans who took those teachings, maybe built on them. Buddhism is an exception to this, but for almost all of the ancient pagan ones, they were taught by ancient, the gods, and then were built on by humans from there. And so if that is the case, then I don't see any reason to believe that we can't do that again. In addition to that, I believe that there are many of us, because if you've been through these traditions, they are having you be active on that level of self that is at the immortal level of being and reincarnates. I personally believe that we can reawaken a whole lot of memories. I mean, I do believe that part of the reason why I think I have as many memories as I do of ancient Greece in particular is because I was initiated. So, I think that there's work that can be done to rebirth the pagan paths if we focus on how can I recover and reawaken the memories of those things that were there before. So I want to talk some about the occult initiations. Now, the word occult, if you don't know this, it just means hidden. Esoteric just means inner. So, but frequently in the literature, you'll talk about the occult initiations. So these are not initiations into a particular lineage. It's not what this is. These are the ones that are at this kind of bigger level. So when you see this in the literature, they talk about the 3 initiations in the literature. And again, I'm not talking about the 3 initiations into like, I'm a 3rd degree Wiccan high priestess. That doesn't mean I have, if I was a 3rd degree, occult initiation, as you will soon see, that means I wouldn't be human anymore. And I clearly am. So a little bit different. So the first occult initiation is really where you enter the path in which that immortal part of your being has been awakened. It has been brought into conscious activity and resonance. And when that happens, when you wake up on that level, there is this inrush of divine love. And once you have experienced that, you will always be drawn back by longing. And they talk about this in the ancient Greek material. The word that they use is pothos. And pothos, this idea that you're longing for this. You're longing for, this the love that has come through in this kind of mystery situation. That's the same word that is used for erotic longing, or sexual longing. And it's not so much that it is necessarily about sexuality, but it's got that kind of like, you can't stop. It's like, it's just there. And there is an aspect of that is just permanent. So like I said, it's that idea that no matter what you do, there's a part of you that's just longing for this kind of union and development and unfolding, and to get closer and closer and closer and continue growing. That's just, it becomes a keynote of who and what you are that is immortal. I also believe that the relationships and the aesthetics are part of what mark you indelibly. So in my circumstance, I absolutely believe that I had my first occult initiation with some of the Hellenic great ones and in ancient Greece. And like, no matter what body I'm born into, I mean, I carry that. That is a part of me. And so it also creates things like, for example, I love Vajrayana Buddhism. I love Tibetan Buddhism. I think that the skillful means that they have as tech are amazing. I love their philosophy. I love all of this, and I take a lot of wisdom from it. And it just doesn't move that deep part of my heart the way in which anything ancient Greek does, pretty much. I mean, so I just think that there's a note there that's an interesting thing, and that's going to be kind of individual. But I do think, if we're talking about the creation of alternative culture, we have the ability to create some things that can do that for new people as we are moving along. I also, I think that, we recapitulate our initiatory unfolding with each incarnation, much like we do on the growth, where you're coming through and you're a child and you're developing, in this way and that way, and you're trying to master the mind and master the, I think that at the same time, if you're on an initiatory path, you do recapitulate the big kind of movement and openings and changing each incarnation as they're coming into being, so that hopefully by the end, you'll be a little bit further along than you were when you came in. So then the third occult initiation is like, this is what takes you out of the cycle of compulsory reincarnation into human form. Now, you can choose to be reborn, as many of the Tulkus in the Vajrayana tradition are, but you maintain more control. You can also just graduate at this point from the human condition altogether and go on and be growing into whatever that next level is, be it as, a hero, as a, whatever it is that is the next step that is beyond this. So that is the third. Now, where the second is, I don't know. I mean, the second is someplace between those two. So it's after you have entered into this, and it's before you're going out. So I don't know that it necessarily even needs a marker in exactly the same way. All the rest in there is kind of like various stages of moving on. And it's probably highly variable according to individual. So anyway, I do want to talk quickly about the relationship of this entire idea to Wiccan initiation. So I do think that the process of going through a Wiccan initiatory path, the Wiccan mysteries, can be a catalyst for one of the great initiations, one of the major ones. It does also give you access to greater lines of power that are associated with traditions, and it makes you recognizable to certain interplane allies that are associated with different houses, lineages, traditions, whatever. It kind of, there is something that marks you in that way, that then some of these beings, or kind of like the keypad, will go, oh, you're one of ours. Okay, But at the same time, your entire spiritual path is an initiatory journey and can be a catalyst for this growth. And I encourage you to think of it that way. So as I mentioned, I'm the member of the Assembly. I'm High Priestess of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel. And in the Assembly, which is a little bit different than many of the other Wiccan traditions, is that each initiation is designed specifically for where the individuals are and what they need at that point. So some of the Wiccan initiations that are highly secretive, it's partially because they do the same ritual for each person as part of their pattern, and that can be very powerful. You know, but it does also mean like you can't tell other people about what that is before they go through it, because it will ruin the experience for them and then it won't work. So you will have done their soul a major disservice. But, you know, in the ASW, for example, it's they design each initiatory ritual is designed specifically for the person. There's pieces that, you know, are there to do some of those other kind of functional work that would tie you into lines of power and give you the pass keys and that kind of stuff. But, you know, at the same time, it's like that we often will invite people that are not initiates at that level to our initiations, because it doesn't harm anything and it can be a beautiful experience. So I want to go through another quick reprise of our current goals. I believe that as human beings at this moment, we are becoming more active and integrated at the level of consciousness that is at the level of being that does not dissipate in death. And any work that we do at that level, any of that work that we can do to be actively aware and moving on that kind of the higher self, that is good, because unfolding that and awakening there is a huge part of what the initiatory path is right now. Also becoming consciously aware of and participatory in group mind and group soul. And that if we do any of the work that is helping us do those things, then that is going to be kind of an accelerated growth pattern for us. So a few different kinds of practice that could help you with that. First of all, just any kind of work, like I said, on conscious activity and levels of being that are more than your talking self. Doing that work is really important. Working on clearly articulating your highest ideals. That gets you to work at that higher level. And it gives you, the other thing that it does is that if you can create some statements around what your highest ideals are, it helps you upon repeating them to build them more and more into kind of the hardware of your mental field. Working on living in a more cosmic perspective. I mean, you know, if you just sat there and actually listened and watched all of this, then this is very much about trying to think in this kind of cosmic perspective. But as you're going through life, trying to think as big picture and cosmically as you can will help you raise where your mind is and put you in more direct awareness and activity on those levels. And working on keeping your path of growth at the forefront of your mind so that you are paying attention to the various lessons that the world and your experience can be teaching you, and then consciously trying to learn the lessons and integrate them. Also working on actively participating in group mind and group soul. And like I said, if you're part of a tradition, then you will be a part of magical group mind, group soul. If you're not, you are still parts of group mind, group soul. You're parts of one where you live, in your family, you know, in your workplace. All of these different situations are group mind, group soul, and you can do a lot of good service there. I do want to talk quickly about some of the dangers of accelerating growth, because like I said, it's not natural. So one of the first things is that, I mentioned this before, but human beings are stimulation junkies, and we need stimulation for growth, but then we also need to take the time to do the integration. So it's really, really easy. And this is not just, you know, occultists and witches and Wiccans and pagans who do this. This is like humans. This is a human problem. So we get really distracted by expansion, and then we don't do the hard work of integration, which in a lot of ways is taking something that's really awesome and doing the work of making it boring. So we don't tend to like that. Another thing is, you know, there's a danger of overextension injury. So what we're doing here is the equivalent of elite spiritual sports. I mean, you know, we need to remember that we're doing that. So doing the work of, like, you know, before you're going to go do something really big magically, you know, warm up a little, you know, try to do some of the the regular kind of exercises rather than just, once, 8 times on the wheel of the year trying to do something really huge where you blow all sorts of energy through yourself. So, trying to really take into account stretching enough. Like if it's also kind of like if you're trying to address something that is a mental pattern like trauma, especially if it is trauma that has been, reinforced in this incarnation and has roots that go back a whole bunch, and you're trying to heal that so you can move on, doing it in a kind of staged way so that you're not just like, let me immediately dive into the most painful part of this and re-traumatize myself. I mean, it's that kind of an idea. It's like you stretch and you do it in a titrated, reasonable way. Another real danger of accelerating your growth is you can find yourself being dehumanized by others. And I want to talk about this a little bit in the pagan community, because it's one of those things where I see this over and over again, especially in the way in which sometimes like our so-called big name pagans are treated by the community, which is like all of a sudden you have somebody who's trying to teach, and they're not allowed to be a fallible human being anymore. And that's really dangerous. And and that can be dangerous in a couple of different ways. So first of all, they're not allowed to be a fallible human being anymore, which means that the first time that they're not given like the flexibility to grow and change. And that can be a real problem. And I'm not talking about the kinds of things like we're talking about actually endangering people. There's certainly have been some absolutely horrific situations of abuse and other kinds of like really, emotionally abusive behavior. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking in general about how sometimes that can be a real danger. Another piece of this can be where, if you put somebody up on a pedestal too much, then, and this is often what happens, you put somebody up on a pedestal, put them up on a pedestal, put them up on a pedestal, they start believing their own press, which is, that's dangerous for their own evolution, right? And then, they screw up and then they've become totally demonized. So, I mean, it's just like there's a pattern here that is a problem. And I think part of this would be addressed by recognizing this as a danger and recognizing when you're about to do this to somebody, some of the consequences that this could have for them. And then, like I said, going with this, another danger is that your ego takes over the mission. And again, this often goes with having been put up on a pedestal a whole bunch. But the trick there, like one of the safeguards there, is to develop consciously detachment. And one of the things that I came in contact with, and I'm very grateful for, it actually arises out of the study of the Bhagavad Gita, which is asking yourself this question. If there is something that you think needs to be done, you think it would be important for the world to do it, and you're like, I have had this idea, and then someone else does it and you don't, are you mad about the fact that you didn't do it? Or are you grateful that it is now out in the world? So that's the kind of detachment. And I often will ask myself that question. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, man, that was my idea. Okay, well, that does tell me that, my ego was totally involved in it. I mean, it may not be a bad thing, but I have to check myself. So, and trying to make sure that it really is about the work and about the mission. Another thing that can happen is if you are really doing a lot of accelerated growth and you are interacting with, people who are they're just normal people, you can end up developing a lack of compassion for them by forgetting that you're on this kind of attempting to accelerate your own spiritual evolution. So, one of the things is when you're doing this kind of work, like you're taking college level courses on some of the soul development stuff. You've chosen to do it. It's voluntary. You've chosen to do it. And then you're turning around and like you're surrounded by second graders. And if you forget that they're second graders because they haven't, chosen to do this, then it can get you really aggravating. trying to keep kind of in mind that these are things that you have chosen to accelerate your development, and that it is not a reasonable or compassionate thing to assume that every single person in your life will have made those choices. So anyway, those are some of the dangers. So I'd like us to reconsider the three jewels again, because I just think that this is a useful framing, and try to think about it when thinking about it as a pagan, as a Wiccan. So again, when we're taking this idea of taking refuge in the Buddha, really what this is building appropriate confidence in yourself and imagining what that looks like. So this idea of like, okay, I am capable of doing this. I am capable of going through this initiatory path and of accelerating my growth. And and there are others who have done it, and I have examples of others who have done it. We have known that there were these traditions all the way back in ancient times, and if others have done it, I can do it. And so I'm now going to imagine that piece. There's also the second one, the taking refuge in the Dharma. I would say it's really the quest for skillful means. I like that framing too from Buddhism, which is, looking around, and I look everywhere. Like, what are the various techniques that I can use that will help me develop appropriately and well? And for me, like, one of the really big ones, it's Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics. I mean, that is so useful as a framing for me, and at some point I'll do another whole video on that, maybe even more than one. But this idea of like, if there are means and there are techniques that other people have used, then I should be trying to learn about them. And then finally, perhaps the most important, is the idea of communitas, that Sangha idea. And communitas is a term that was used by a lot of religious studies researchers, sociological researchers who were looking at initiations. They were looking specifically at rites of passage initiations, but the idea is that you have this community of people who are going through the initiatory process together. And in so doing, they are able to bond. This is really finding your community of other people who are on a initiatory path with you. And it's one of the great things about working with a group. But even if you're not working with a group, you can probably find some others, but you need to make the effort in order to do it. It becomes a little bit more challenging maybe, but still definitely worthwhile. Because in this idea of community, you are seeking and giving support to each other, and you're seeking to serve each other's greatest good. That becomes your work, is, me finding out how to serve your greatest good. And that's ultimately the definition of friendship, philia. A friend is in no need of justice, because if you are a true friend, then your highest wish is for their highest good. So anyway, this idea of really building strong community is the most effective risk mitigation for all of those dangers of an accelerated path. Good friends who are on a similar path, who will understand this, they are the ones who, if you have a good community, will tell you if you are allowing your ego to get in the way of the work. They are the ones who will be careful with you and allow you to not get dehumanized, or will build you back up, or will, be careful about having you not be on a pedestal, but will build up your confidence in a real way. So being a good member of a community, of a Sangha, of a community specifically of people who are on an initiatory path, it requires tremendous self-knowledge. It requires self-regulation. It requires a true service orientation. And it gives you an awful lot of opportunities to build and perfect all of those things, which will aid your growth. So that is what I have to say on this topic today. I hope that this has been useful for you. Like I said, I think that this is a very important topic and can help us in this moment to both find and create meaning. So thank you.